Okay, well, hello everyone. Today I want to continue the talk that I started in my last message about being in the center of God's will. How do you know God's plan for your life? And last time we talked about Romans 8:28. All things work for good to those that are called according to God's purpose, those that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. And we spent a little bit of time talking about, well, what is God's purpose? What is his plan? And his plan is very simple. Number one priority in God's view is that we are becoming transformed into the character of his son Jesus. That's number one. That's job one. That's the most important thing. Does God care about your life? Does he care about the important details in your life, the tiny details in your life? Of course he does. Is he capable of knowing about all of these tiny details? Of course he is. And he loves us intimately. He knows us intimately. And of course he cares very much about all of the things that we care about. He says very clearly, if you delight in the Lord, he will give you the desires of your heart. Not only does he know the desires of your heart, he knows them better than we do. Okay, if we just trust the Lord, instead of trying to force our plans, if we just trust the Lord and focus on becoming more and more like Jesus, he's going to open doors to situations that we could never even imagine, that will make the desires of our heart just come alive and will satisfy us in ways that we could never imagine. And today I want to talk about the book of Ecclesiastes, because the book of Ecclesiastes is often misunderstood, and it's also very simple. Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, and you have to understand that Solomon lived a very sad life. He was the wisest man in the world. He was the richest man in the world. The man had 1,000 wives, okay, but he wasn't very smart, okay? And towards the end of his life, he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, and the famous line from the book of Ecclesiastes is, "Everything under the sun is meaningless." Now, he lived his life in a way that didn't honor and glorify God. He was not in the center of God's will. He was not trying to be transformed into the image of God's Son or in any image of God. In fact, he was worshiping false gods. It says clearly that his many beautiful women turned his heart away from God. And so he lived his life in pursuit of pleasure, in pursuit of self, and in pursuit of gratification. And at the end of his life, he was filled with regret and he was filled with remorse. And he said, everything under the sun is meaningless. Now we have to understand, though, that the word meaningless is very clear. It means vanity, just worthless. It's useless. There's no value in it. But what does it mean, everything under the sun? That is what we call a Hebraism. It's an idiomatic phrase. We have them in English. Every language has them. Idiomatic phrases mean that you don't take them literally, you take them figuratively. And what this phrase means is not literally everything under the sun. It means everything without God. Without God, everything is meaningless. And that is the point that Solomon's making. This is the conclusion he comes to at the end of his very sad life. All of the riches, richer than any man that's ever lived. All of the wisdom, more wisdom than any man that's ever lived. And I dare say more wives than any man should ever want to have. I got one wife, more than enough for me. Keeps my hands full and my head spinning at a constant rate. So, what is his point? His point is exactly what we've been talking about. If you are in the center of God's will, if you're in the center of God's will, which means you are called according to his purpose. What is his purpose? To be changed into the character of his son Jesus. And this is a steady, slow change. It's a process that happens very slowly over the course of our life, day by day, moment by moment. And it's a continual surrendering of our will to God. It is what Jesus was talking about when he said, pick up your cross and follow me. It's what Paul was talking about when he said, I die daily. We need to surrender our will to the Lord Jesus, to become more like him, to invite him to come in, to take the throne of our life and to start steering the yacht of our life, I guess, as you want to say it. So the point is this. Ecclesiastes is making it very clear that no matter what you have in this world, it is meaningless without God. So the Bible gives us plenty of examples, and Solomon, of course, was one example. Another great example is King Saul. You know, King Saul was a Benjaminite. A Benjaminite was not supposed to be king. The kings of Israel were supposed to come from the tribe of Judah, but there was a small problem. The problem was Judah had an incestuous affair with his daughter-in-law Tamar, and they had twins from this union. And the twins, of course, were the product of incest, which went against the Mosaic law, and there was a 10-generation curse placed upon the tribe of Judah. Now, God's timing is always perfect. God's timing is always perfect. So guess who came at the exact end of those 10 generations? King David. King David was always meant to be king. That was God's plan all along. And kings were supposed to come from the tribe of Judah, not from the tribe of Benjamin. But God bestowed tremendous favor on King Saul by having him anointed king. But what happened? King Saul started out humble. He actually hid in the baggage when they were trying to consecrate him. They were trying to anoint him as king. He was hiding. That's how humble he was. But King Saul became very arrogant. He became proud. He became jealous of David because he knew that David was going to take the kingdom. And rather than accept God's will and submit to God's will, he wanted to kill David. And he had conversations with his son Jonathan. Jonathan was best friends with David, and Jonathan was perfectly comfortable. He was perfectly happy with the fact that David was going to become king. He had accepted it. He realized this was God's will. He realized that his father was never intended to create some kind of family dynasty that would stay on the throne of Israel forever. So Jonathan wasn't really invested in his father's plans to create this family dynasty. He was happy to let David become king. But Saul, constantly telling him, "You son of a motherless dog, don't you realize that as long as David lives, you will never get the throne of Israel?" Jonathan's like, "I'm okay with that, Dad. No problem. That's God's will all along." See, we need to be more like Jonathan. We need to be more like Jonathan and wait and be willing to wait for God's timing and be willing to just say, you know, if it's your will, great. And if it's not, I want to be in the center of your will. Stop putting our worldly ambitions in front of God's plans.